They laughed when she said it. That was the moment I knew she'd gone too far. My son's fiancée stood in a ballroom filled with lawyers, donors, and senior partners and told them confidently, casually, that I was just the night custodian. That my job was emptying trash cans and scrubbing floors for a wage barely above minimum. She said it like it explained everything. What she didn't know, what no one in that room knew yet. If you're listening to this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you were listening from. Was that I had spent more than 2 decades shaping the very laws that govern their careers. For hours later, the Chief Justice walked into that same ballroom and called my name. And in front of everyone she wanted to impress, the truth finally arrived. My name is Daniel Whitaker, and this is the story of how a woman who thought status was everything publicly dismantled her own future by underestimating a quiet old man holding a mop. For most people watching this, the story sounds impossible. But if you've ever been dismissed because of how you dress, where you live, or what someone assumes you earn, then you already understand how this begins. Because this story isn't really about law. It's about how people behave when they believe they are superior, and what happens when they're wrong. If you've ever been talked down to, if you've ever been judged by your job title instead of your character, then stay with me. She thought she was humiliating a nobody. Instead, she exposed herself, and it all started 18 months earlier. The first time my future daughter-in-law looked at me and decided I didn't matter. My son, Evan, had done well for himself, better than I ever said out loud. He worked in software architecture for a growing cybersecurity firm near the harbor, pulling in just over $140,000 a year, plus bonuses. He owned a downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows, drove a modest luxury sedan, and paid his bills early, not because he had to, but because he liked the feeling of control. I was proud of him in a way that never needed words. Evan had grown up watching me leave the house before sunrise and return late, often quiet, often tired, sometimes carrying burdens I could never explain. He never once complained. He learned early that dignity didn't require noise. Then he met Lauren Caldwell. Lauren came from old Vancouver money, the kind that didn't talk about wealth because it had never known absence. Her family ran Caldwell and Pierce, a corporate litigation firm that handled acquisitions worth hundreds of millions every year. Their offices occupied the top floors of a glass tower overlooking Cole Harbor, and their client list read like a who's who of multinational power. Lauren herself was sharp, polished, and ambitious. At 32, she was already being positioned for partnership. She dressed impeccably, spoke confidently, and believed deeply in visible success. The first time we met, I wanted to like her. I really did. It was a Sunday afternoon dinner at Evan's place. Simple food, good wine, laughter at first. Then she asked me what I did. I work nights at a public high school, I said. Facilities? She blinked. Once, then smiled. Oh, she said. Maintenance. Yes, I replied. Someone has to keep the place running. She nodded slowly, the way people do when they've already made a decision. The conversation moved on, but something had shifted. I noticed it when she introduced me to her parents later that month. This is Evan's father, she said. He works at a school. Not worked. Not used to do other things. Just that. Her mother, Patricia Caldwell, smiled politely. Her father asked no follow-up questions. At dinners after that, I became a footnote. Lauren spoke passionately about cases, billable hours, firm strategy. Her brother arrived once in a new imported coupe and announced he'd just closed a settlement worth over $12 million. Everyone applauded. Lauren glanced at me and said, lightly, "We're very career-driven people." I smiled and kept eating. The first real sting came 3 months later at Evan's birthday. Lauren raised her glass and joked about people who peak early versus those who never really launch. Her eyes flicked toward me, just briefly, long enough to be intentional. Evan noticed. He always noticed. That night, after everyone left, he apologized. "She doesn't mean it the way it sounds," he said. "She means exactly what it sounds like," I replied gently. He didn't argue, because deep down he knew. What Lauren never asked was why I lived the way I did. Why a man in his early 60s rented a small apartment instead of owning property. Why I drove a 10-year-old sedan with over 100,000 miles on it. Why I worked nights cleaning classrooms instead of consulting or teaching or leveraging experience. She saw simplicity and assumed failure. What she couldn't see were the choices behind it. After 26 years on the bench, years filled with cases that tore families apart, determined corporate futures, and redefined constitutional boundaries, I wanted quiet. I wanted anonymity. I wanted to come home to my wife, Mary Ann, without the weight of decisions that followed me into sleep. Mopping floors doesn't haunt you. People do, but simplicity comes with a cost. People judge what they see. They never ask what you've survived. Lauren didn't see precedent. She saw mop. And over the next year, she made sure everyone else saw it too. The engagement changed everything. Or maybe it just gave Lauren permission to stop pretending. She announced it the way a press release announces a merger, confident, polished, already framed as a victory. Evan proposed on a cliffside trail overlooking the ocean at sunset. She posted the photos within minutes. Comments flooded in from partners, associates, former classmates, and clients. Perfect match. Power couple. So proud of you. Lauren absorbed it all like oxygen. 2 weeks later, she invited us to dinner, not to celebrate, but to plan. We're hosting the engagement gala at the Grand Meridian Hotel, she said, sliding a glossy brochure across the table. Ballroom capacity is 250. We're expecting around 200 guests. Guests? Marian asked. For an engagement? Lauren smiled patiently. This isn't just a party. It's an introduction. An introduction to whom was obvious. Senior partners, judges, corporate counsel, donors, people whose opinions she believed determined value. We're budgeting just over $100,000, she continued. It needs to reflect our standards. Evan shifted in his chair. That's a lot, he said carefully. It's an investment, Lauren replied. My family's reputation matters. Then she looked at me. We'll of course understand if some contributions aren't equal. I nodded. I'll contribute what I reasonably can. She smiled, relieved, as if the problem had resolved itself. Later that night, Evan called me. She wants me to cover nearly half, he said quietly. I can manage it, but it's tight. You don't have to prove anything, I told him. I know, he said, but she keeps saying appearances matter. That was when I understood. This wasn't about celebration. It was about control. Lauren's comments became sharper after that. At planning meetings, she referred to my contribution as symbolic. She joked about seating arrangements. She asked twice whether I owned a suit appropriate for professional events. Once, when discussing table placement, she said, we should probably keep family together, but maybe not too close to the senior partners. She didn't look at me when she said it. Marianne did. And this time, she didn't stay silent. Daniel has served this province longer than most people in that room have practiced law, she said calmly. Lauren laughed. Serve how? She asked. By cleaning chalkboards? I felt Marianne tense beside me. I placed my hand over hers. Not yet, I said softly. Some lessons take time. Lauren rolled her eyes. Some people aim high, she said. Others settle. That night, Marianne didn't sleep. How long are you going to let her do this? She asked. As long as she thinks she's safe, I replied. The real breaking point came 3 weeks before the gala. Evan called me after midnight. She wants to move you, he said. Move me where? To a back table, near the service staff. I closed my eyes. What did you say? I said absolutely not, he replied. I told her you sit with family or I cancel everything. There was silence on the line. She told me I was choosing embarrassment over ambition, he added. That was when I realized the truth. Lauren wasn't just disrespecting me. She was using my perceived lack of status to reshape how my son saw himself. And that was something I could not allow. The gala was no longer just a party. It was going to be a reckoning. The pre-event reception was held at Caldwell and Pierce's downtown offices. A glass and steel tower overlooking the harbor, high enough that clouds drifted past the windows like slow-moving applause. 80 people attended. Partners, senior associates, family friends, a few carefully selected judges and donors. Lauren had planned it down to the minute. Waitstaff in tailored black uniforms circulated with champagne flutes. Jazz played softly in the background. The city glowed beneath us like a trophy. I stood near the window, nursing a glass of water. Lauren took the floor. "I want to thank everyone for coming," she said, smiling with practiced ease. "This weekend represents everything our community values: excellence, achievement, and legacy." Her father nodded proudly. "My family built this firm from nothing," she continued. "And Evan and I are committed to building something just as meaningful." Applause followed. Then her gaze found me. "And of course," she said lightly, "we all come from different paths. Some people pursue professional excellence. Others find fulfillment in simpler, more practical roles. A few people shifted." Lauren raised her glass. "There's dignity in all work," she added, "even custodial work. Someone has to keep the lights on." A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the room. Evan's jaw tightened. I felt Marion stiffen beside me. That was when I stood. The room quieted not because I demanded it, but because silence can be contagious when people sense a line has been crossed. "May I?" I asked calmly. Lauren hesitated, then nodded. She couldn't refuse without looking cruel. I lifted my glass. "To service," I said. "Some serve loudly. Some serve quietly. Both matter more than titles." I took a sip and sat down. Nothing else. No accusation. No defense. No explanation. But something had shifted. Lauren felt it. After the reception, she cornered Evan near the hallway. "Your father embarrassed me," she hissed. "He lectured my colleagues. He made a toast," Evan replied. "That's all." "He implied moral superiority," she snapped. "My family employs hundreds. We don't need lessons about service from someone who cleans classrooms." "That's enough," Evan said. She froze. Because that was new, I stepped into view. "Problem?" I asked quietly. Lauren turned to me, her smile returning like armor. "We were just discussing tomorrow's seating arrangements." "I see. This gala is very important," she said. "First impressions matter." "They do," I agreed. She studied my face, searching for anger, for weakness. She found neither. "I trust you'll represent the family appropriately," she said. "I always do." As she walked away, she whispered to Evan, "We'll discuss this later." I watched her go. She thought she was in control. She had no idea the stage she'd built was about to collapse under her own words. The morning of the gala arrived cold and clear, the kind of winter brightness that felt surgical rather than warm. Light cut across the harbor like polished steel. Every surface gleamed. The water was too calm, the sky too blue. Even the gulls wheeling outside the window seemed choreographed, their white bodies flashing and folding against the air as if responding to invisible signals. It was a day meant to look flawless. From the 32nd floor of the hotel, the ballroom was visible through a long pane of glass. Staff moved below like pieces on a board. White tablecloths unfurled with identical precision, floral arrangements lowered and adjusted, crystal glasses placed, removed, and placed again, until symmetry felt mandatory rather than decorative. The floor was vacuumed twice. The podium repositioned by inches. Light levels were tested and retested. The city had dressed itself for ceremony. And ceremonies, I had learned, were rarely about celebration. They were about alignment. Lauren had been awake long before I was. She stood in front of the mirror in a silk robe, the pale fabric catching the light as she rehearsed lines under her breath. Each sentence carried the same rhythm: opening warmth, calibrated humility, a gentle upward curve at the end. Smiles, pauses, gratitude measured to the second. She stopped, frowned, adjusted her posture, and began again. "I want to thank Dash," she murmured. She shook her head. "No, too formal." She tried again, softer. "I'm so honored, Dash." Another pause, another correction. Her voice was never uncertain, but it was never free. Evan sat on the edge of the bed, jacket draped across his lap, phone glowing faintly in the half-light. He scrolled through emails with a practiced tension, jaw set, thumb moving faster than his eyes. Every few seconds, his brow tightened, and he exhaled sharply through his nose. He had been like this since dawn, responding to donors, coordinating seating changes, fielding last-minute requests for recognition, placement, visibility. Crisis, to Evan, was not a disruption. It was a language. Marianne poured coffee at the small service counter. Her movements were unhurried, almost ceremonial, as if this were any other morning, as if the air were not already heavy with expectation. "No one ever remembers the small mistakes," she said. "They only remember how you made them feel." Evan did not answer. I fastened my cufflinks. They were plain silver. Unremarkable. That was intentional. Lauren glanced at me in the mirror. "Are you nervous?" she asked suddenly. Her voice was light, almost teasing, but her eyes were searching. "About what?" I said. "Being around so many professionals," she replied. "It could be intimidating." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll manage," I said. She studied my reflection longer than necessary. Something in her expression shifted, not suspicion, not yet, but a faint recalibration, like a scale being adjusted, as if some internal measurement had begun to drift. "Of course you will," she said, but the words landed wrong. The elevator ride down was silent. Mirrored walls reflected us into fragments: Lauren's composure, Evan's tension, Marianne's calm, my own studied neutrality. 32 floors. 32 chances for someone to speak. No one did. The lobby smelled of citrus polish and expensive coffee. Light spilled through the tall windows in golden sheets. People moved with purpose. Donors, organizers, volunteers, all wearing the faint, performative brightness that came with events designed to impress. Laughter rose and fell like practiced music. Shoes clicked with intention. This was not joy. It was choreography. I stepped aside to order coffee while the others spoke with the coordinator. That was when my secure phone rang. I rarely carried it in public. I almost never answered it in public. The tone was subtle, clinical, impossible to mistake. "Whitaker," I said quietly. There was a brief pause, then a familiar voice. "Daniel," she said, "we need to speak." Her voice was controlled, precise, carrying the weight of rooms I no longer occupied. Hearing it again felt like standing in a chamber where every word had consequences. "Not today," I replied. "Family event." "That's precisely why," she said. "Check your correspondence." The line went dead. For a moment, the noise of the lobby seemed distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. I lowered the phone. Lauren stood a few feet away, coffee in her hands, watching me. "That sounded official," she said. "School board matters," I replied. Her brow furrowed. "You're a custodian," she said gently. "What kind of school board calls you on a secure line?" "Emergency maintenance," I said. "You'd be surprised." She hesitated. "I suppose," she said, but she didn't look convinced. The venue was a converted maritime hall, high ceilings, exposed beams, chandeliers suspended like constellations. The walls still smelled faintly of salt and old wood beneath the polish and perfume. The smell of flowers was overwhelming. White lilies, roses, something sharp and green beneath it all. Lauren moved through the space with practiced grace, greeting sponsors, laughing lightly, adjusting place cards, smoothing napkins, thanking volunteers by name. She belonged in rooms like this. She always had. She had been trained for rooms like this since childhood, though she might not have called it that. I stayed near the periphery. I had learned long ago that presence did not require prominence. The first sign came when a man I did not recognize paused, mid-conversation, as I passed. Not to greet me, to watch me. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in hostility, but in recognition. Then he looked away, quickly, as if reminded of something. The second sign came when a woman in a tailored navy dress approached Marianne, nodded to me without smiling, and said, "He's here." Marianne inclined her head. "That's good," she replied. No one explained. The third sign was more direct. Two men approached. They wore dark suits, not formal enough for donors, too precise for staff. Their posture was contained, economical. Their eyes missed nothing. "Excuse me, sir," one said. "Daniel Whitaker?" Lauren turned. "Yes," I said. "We need to confirm your address for updated records." The words were neutral. The tone was not. I recited it. They nodded, thanked me, and walked away. Lauren's hand closed around my arm. "Who were they?" "No idea," I said. "Probably a mix-up." "They said records," she whispered. "That's not school maintenance language. You'd be surprised what words get reused." Her grip tightened. "Daniel," she said quietly, That was not normal. No, I said evenly. It wasn't. She stared at me. That wasn't reassuring. The envelope arrived mid-afternoon. It was slid under the door, thick, sealed, the paper heavier than necessary, the weight of it disproportionate to its size. Lauren picked it up before I could. "Office of the Chief Justice," she read. Her face drained, the color retreating as if the words themselves carried chill. "What is this?" "Retired Judges Association," I said. "They reuse stationery." Her eyes flicked back to the letterhead. "That's not how stationery works. It is when organizations merge." "Open it. It's private." Her voice sharpened. "Daniel, if there's something I need to know, dash." "There isn't. Not today." Marion entered the room, paused when she saw the envelope. Her eyes met mine. "We should talk later," she said. Lauren's composure cracked. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Everyone is acting like there's some massive secret." Marianne's voice was calm. "Some things reveal themselves in their own time." Lauren laughed, but it was thin, brittle. "He's a school custodian," she said. "This is absurd." Marianne met her gaze. "Is he?" The room went very still. Even the distant sound of traffic seemed to fade. Lauren swallowed. "What do you mean, is he?" Marianne didn't answer. She didn't need to. By the time we went downstairs for photographs, Lauren was no longer steady. She watched me as if I might change shape if she looked away. She noticed the nods, the pauses in conversation, the subtle deference. She noticed when a man in a tailored suit shook my hand a second longer than necessary and said, "It's good to see you again, sir." She noticed when a woman with a judiciary pin inclined her head to me before greeting her. She noticed the way certain conversations stopped when I approached, then resumed in lower tones. "You know these people," she said. "Not really. They know you. People remember faces. Not like that." Her voice was tight now, controlled by effort. Dinner was announced. The lights dimmed. The orchestra began. Silverware chimed softly against porcelain. Lauren sat rigid beside me. Her smile was fixed. Her eyes were no longer. "Daniel," she whispered, "what are you?" I looked at the stage. The host stepped forward. The microphone caught. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight." Lauren's hand trembled on the tablecloth. "I'm going to ask you on that stage," she said, barely audible. My jaw tightened. "Please don't. I need to know." And somewhere, deep in the machinery of the evening, something shifted. The room leaned forward. The truth, long buried under ordinary years, prepared to surface. The ballroom was flawless. Not merely beautiful, that word was too small, but calibrated. Every surface reflected intention. The chandeliers did not blaze. They glowed. Their light was filtered through layered crystal, refracted before it touched the silk tablecloths, softened before it reached the cutlery, so that nothing shone too brightly, nothing competed, nothing demanded. The illumination was not meant to impress. It was meant to reassure. This was not decoration. It was signaling, money behaving quietly. The ceiling rose with architectural confidence, high enough to imply institutional authority without ostentation. The kind of height that suggested courts, boardrooms, and inherited endowments rather than hotels or banquet halls. The walls, paneled in muted gold, did not glitter. They absorbed. Even the air carried the faint, cultivated neutrality of a place where nothing accidental was permitted to remain. 220 guests. Not one more than necessary. Not one fewer than impressive. Judges in tailored suits, their posture unconsciously disciplined by decades of command. Senior partners whose names appeared on firm mastheads and appellate briefs. Corporate counsel with the careful eyes of people accustomed to risk but insulated from consequence. Politicians who shook hands like contracts. Donors who smiled like endowments. Spouses who understood when to speak and, more importantly, when not to. This was not a celebration. It was a demonstration, and the room hummed with confidence. Not loud confidence, not exuberant confidence, the kind that has never had to prove itself. Lauren was built for rooms like this. She moved through the crowd as if the floor had been poured for her stride. Not with arrogance, she understood better than that, but with the smooth economy of someone trained from childhood to recognize where influence sits and how to lean into it. Her laughter arrived at precisely the right volume. Her hand rested on arms just long enough to suggest intimacy, never long enough to impose. She tilted her head when listening, angled her shoulders when speaking, and somehow managed to make each person feel individually selected. This was not charm. It was discipline. She had been educated in it. Boarding schools where social hierarchies were learned as early as algebra. Summer programs that taught rhetoric alongside fencing. Dinner tables where silence was a language and interruption a failure of breeding. She knew which fork to use, but more importantly, she knew which opinions to voice and which to keep polished but invisible. Influence, Lauren had been taught, is not seized. It is curated. Evan remained close, his hand often hovering at the small of her back, his smile practiced and sincere at once. He had learned, long ago, how to perform stability. Law school had taught him polish. His firm had taught him restraint. His childhood had taught him something quieter, that survival sometimes requires you to become agreeable. But I saw the tension, in the way his shoulders stayed just slightly too square, in the way his jaw tightened when he believed no one was watching, in the way the stem of his wine glass bore the faintest tremor when he lifted it. He was a man preparing for something he could not yet name. Marianne sat beside me, posture immaculate, hands folded lightly over her napkin. She wore navy, understated, precise. Her jewelry was minimal. Her hair perfectly arranged. If she was uneasy, she gave no sign. Marianne had learned, years ago, that composure is not the absence of fear, it is the refusal to display it. We had learned that lesson together in rooms that were not nearly so elegant. I ate quietly. I had learned that habit in places where noise attracted the wrong kind of attention. Lauren watched me like a ticking clock, not openly, not with hostility, but her gaze found me again and again, sharp and measuring, returning to me as if to confirm something that refused to resolve. There was calculation in it, and impatience. She had known me officially for 18 months. In that time, she had learned my routines, my silences, my unwillingness to volunteer information, my careful politeness, my tendency to arrive early and leave without ceremony. She had cataloged me. I did not fit. Dinner unfolded in the choreography of practiced elegance. Waiters moved with trained invisibility, their steps synchronized, their interruptions almost apologetic. Wine was poured at calibrated intervals. Plates were exchanged without disruption. Compliments were offered, received, returned like currency. And beneath it all, the air thickened, not with overt tension. That would have been vulgar, but with the slow accumulation of something unsaid. I felt it in the way conversations grew marginally louder, as if people were compensating for an absence they could not identify. In the way Lauren's smile sharpened. In the way Evan began to speak less and listen more. In the way Marianne's hand found mine beneath the table and stayed there. The quartet played on. The room listened less. The speeches began after dessert. Lauren's father rose first. He did not need the microphone, but he used it anyway. Power, like wealth, prefers amplification even when it is already audible. He spoke of legacy, of discipline, of reputation, of families who understood the burden of their names, of institutions that endure because they are built on trust and protected by discretion. He spoke of transparency as a virtue and secrecy as a danger. Applause followed, warm and approving. Then Evan stood. He thanked everyone. He spoke of partnership, of loyalty, of family. His voice wavered once, only once, when his eyes flicked briefly to me. Then it steadied. More applause. Softer. More personal. Then Lauren stood. She adjusted the microphone. The room shifted. This was her moment. I want to thank everyone for being here, she began. Tonight is special, not just because of our engagement, but because it represents honesty. The word landed wrong. I felt it before I understood it, like a note just off-key in a familiar melody. I've learned a lot today, she continued, smiling faintly, about how well we really know the people closest to us. Cutlery stilled. Glasses paused mid-lift. For the past year and a half, she said, I've known my future father-in-law as a school custodian, someone who cleans classrooms for a modest hourly wage. A murmur rippled across the tables. Evan's hand tightened on the edge of his chair. But today, Lauren continued, her voice sharpening, I've learned that court services officers know his name, that senior judges greet him like a colleague, that official correspondence arrives for him from places that do not send mail to custodians. The murmuring grew. A judge frowned. A partner exchanged a look. Evan reached for her arm. Lauren, she pulled away. I think everyone here deserves clarity, she said, especially given the professional community represented. Her eyes locked on me. Daniel Whitaker, she said carefully, what exactly do you do? Silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of attention. Every face turned. I felt Evan's distress like a physical weight. Marianne's hand rested over mine, steady. I looked at Lauren. Are you sure you want this answered here? I asked. Yes, she said. I want the truth. Right now. I nodded. I reached into my jacket. The envelope emerged. Cream. Softened by time. My official title, I said, is Director of Judicial Security and Interagency Oversight for the state. Recognition moved through the room like a tide. A judge's eyes widened. A senator straightened. A donor inhaled sharply. I continued. I spoke of my mandate, of the quiet corridors where cases disappear when they threaten the wrong interests, of the committees that review not verdicts, but vulnerabilities, of the files that never become public because their contents would fracture confidence, of the function of power when it must be defended from itself. As I spoke, the room recalibrated. Power shifted. Assumptions collapsed. Reputations reweighted. Faces rearranged. By the time I finished, the silence was no longer disbelief. It was reckoning. When I slid the identification back into the envelope, I felt not triumph, but finality. Evan stood. Dad, you're serious? Always. Lauren's father cleared his throat. Director Whitaker, this is unexpected. Yes, I replied. It usually is. Lauren whispered. You had no right to test me. I didn't, I said. You tested yourself. The quartet had stopped. The dinner resumed. But nothing in that ballroom would ever feel flawless again. Silence did not vanish when the applause ended. It thickened. The kind of silence that is not absence, but weight. The chandelier's light still fractured across the table, but now the reflections felt harsher, less decorative. The polished surfaces that had once suggested elegance now seemed clinical, almost surgical, exposing every tremor of hand, every forced breath, every flicker of the eyes that had moments earlier been so comfortable in their assumptions. Lauren remained seated. She had not joined the applause. She had not moved. Her fingers still hovered near her mouth, as if the last words she had spoken were a fragile object she might drop if she lowered her hand. Her lips were parted, but no sound came. The carefully constructed expression she wore in public confidence, sharpened to performance, had cracked open, revealing something softer beneath it, and far less composed. Shock, when it is genuine, is not dramatic. It is disorganizing. Around her, people resumed their seats slowly, awkwardly, the way one does after standing for a moment of collective recognition that no longer quite knows where to go. Glasses were lifted, set down again. Cutlery clicked against china with nervous precision. Justice Holbrook sat, but he did not look away from me. He studied me the way one judge studies another when the robes are off, and only the mind remains. You never mentioned it, he said quietly. I inclined my head. I wasn't asked. A corner of his mouth lifted. Touché. Across the table, Evan still stood. His chair had tipped back slightly, one leg unbalanced, forgotten in the moment. His hands were braced against the table's edge, knuckles pale, as though the weight of the revelation required physical anchoring. Dad, he said again, softer now. All this time. Yes, I said. He swallowed. All those nights you came home tired. The long hours. The weekends. I nodded. Lauren's gaze snapped to him. You knew? She asked. He turned to her. No, he said, but I never believed what you said either. Her eyes widened. The betrayal in that look was almost childlike. I had seen that look before. In defendants when the evidence finally aligned. In witnesses when their own words turned against them. In colleagues when a precedent unraveled a lifetime of comfortable interpretation. Lauren had built her understanding of the world on a single, unexamined assumption. That status is visible, that worth is noisy, that power must announce itself to be real. This room had been her stage. Tonight, it had become her courtroom. "I don't understand," she whispered. Her voice, when it came, was not sharp. It was thin. "You let me talk like that? You let me think, Dash, that you were superior?" I asked gently. Her eyes filled. "I didn't say that. You didn't need to." The words were not unkind. They were simply accurate. She shook her head, a small, rapid motion, as if trying to dislodge the reality pressing in. "You could have told me." "Yes," I agreed. "I could have." "Then why didn't you?" "Because the truth, in many cases, is not revealed. It is invited." I did not answer immediately. Around us, the guests pretended to resume their meal, but no one truly ate. They moved food with their forks. They sipped wine they did not taste. They leaned slightly toward one another, exchanging murmurs that were not quite private. Lauren was no longer the center of admiration. She was the subject, and she knew it. "When you met me," I said finally, "what did you see?" She hesitated. "A man who worked with his hands." "And what did that mean to you?" She opened her mouth, closed it. Evan exhaled sharply. "It meant he wasn't important enough," he said. She flinched. "That's not Dash." "It is," I said softly. "Or it was." Her shoulders slumped. For the first time that evening, she looked tired. Not socially tired. Morally. "I grew up with nothing," she said suddenly. "Do you know that?" "Nothing. My father worked 2 jobs. My mother cleaned houses. I swore I would never live like that again." "And you equated dignity with hierarchy," I said. She nodded once. "I thought I was protecting myself." "You were," I said, "from your own fear." Her eyes lifted to mine. "Then why punish me for it?" The word punishment hung between us, heavy with implication. "I am not punishing you," I said. "I am declining to protect you from the consequences of your beliefs." Justice Holbrook cleared his throat. "Daniel," he said, "you always did have a way with language." A few guests laughed quietly, but the humor did not quite land. Lauren looked around. Faces she had curated, opinions she had shaped, influence she had assumed. All of it was recalibrating without her consent. One woman, whom Lauren had introduced earlier as practically family, avoided her gaze entirely. Another whispered something to her husband, who nodded slowly. Status is fragile. It depends not on what one is, but on what others believe one to be. And belief, once cracked, rarely repairs itself in the same shape. Lauren pushed her chair back and stood. Her movement was abrupt, the legs of the chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, the sound cutting through the low murmur of conversation like a blade drawn too quickly from its sheath. The sound was wrong for the room. Everything else that evening had been engineered to be soft. The lighting, the music, the laughter, even the silverware had been selected for the way it whispered against porcelain. This was a table designed not merely for dining, but for display, a theater of refinement in which every gesture had been rehearsed, even when no one admitted to rehearsal. Her chair, by contrast, announced itself. "I need some air," she said. It was not a request. It was not even an explanation. It was a declaration issued to the room, as though oxygen itself were something she could command. For a fraction of a second, I thought she might wait, that she might offer a smile, a practiced apology, some thin veneer of grace to cover the fracture. But Lauren had never been a woman who retreated with softness. When she withdrew, she did so with the same sharpness she used to advance. No one stopped her. Not Evan. Not the guests. Not even those who, only moments before, had laughed at her jokes and mirrored her disdain. A dozen eyes followed the line of her body as she moved, the slight stiffness in her shoulders betraying the effort it took to maintain elegance when equilibrium had already been lost. Her heels struck the floor with a brittle, percussive rhythm, each step an attempt at composure that no longer convinced. There is a particular sound a confident woman makes when she is no longer certain of her ground. It is not hesitation. It is acceleration. The balcony doors opened, then closed. A soft, decisive click. The sound of separation. Not merely between her and the room, but between the person she had been allowed to be and the person she was about to confront. For a moment, no one spoke. The table, which moments before had been an orchestra of cutlery, glassware, and controlled laughter, now seemed to hold its breath. Even the air felt paused, as though the room itself were uncertain how to proceed. I watched the guests. Some looked at their plates. Some looked at one another. Some looked, with a curiosity they would later deny, at me. Evan remained standing. He had risen when she did, an instinctive motion, the body reacting before the mind had finished forming its defense. He did not follow her. He did not sit. He did not reach for his glass. He simply stood there, his hands resting against the back of his chair, as though the furniture were the only thing anchoring him to the room. In that posture, I saw the boy he had been, the child who had learned early that stillness was sometimes safer than action. He looked at me. "Why now?" he asked. His voice was not raised. It was quieter than I expected. That, more than volume, betrayed the depth of his disturbance. In a loud voice, there is certainty, even if it is false. In a quiet one, there is calculation, fear, and a desperate attempt to remain in control. "Because tonight was not about me," I said. "It was about you." A faint crease appeared between his brows, the same line I had seen when he was 8 years old and trying to understand why his mother's promises were not always kept. Memory is an inconvenient witness. It appears without invitation, carrying evidence the present would prefer to ignore. "She humiliates people, Dad," he said. "She's done it to waiters, to colleagues, to strangers." His eyes did not leave mine. "I've seen it. I've hated it. But I thought it was harmless." The word hung between us. Harmless is a word we use when we want to absolve ourselves of response. Like a child's toy left on a staircase. Like a joke that lands only on one side of the room. Like a comment made in public that is later dismissed as misunderstanding. "It is never harmless," I said. "It teaches those who watch that cruelty is sophistication." Around us, conversation attempted to reassemble itself in fragments. A glass was refilled too loudly. Someone laughed a fraction too long. A chair scraped in a nervous echo of Lauren's departure. Civilization is maintained not by virtue, but by the mutual agreement to pretend. Evan nodded slowly. "I think I knew," he said. "I just didn't want to confront it." "Confrontation is expensive," I said, "but avoidance is costlier." He exhaled, the sound heavy, as though something long held had finally been released. "She's my wife." "Yes." "And you're my father." "Yes." The space between those two facts trembled. In that silence, I could feel the weight of years compress into a single moment. His childhood, his marriage, my failures, my restraint, his longing for harmony, my insistence on structure, all of it balanced now on a question that could not be postponed. I had not raised him to be cruel. I had not raised him to be indifferent. But I had raised him to value peace, and peace, when misunderstood, becomes complicity. "I don't know what to do," he said. "That is not my decision," I replied, "but it will be your responsibility." Responsibility is a word that ages a man faster than time. The guests, sensing that the evening's true climax had passed, began to collect themselves. Some excused themselves with exaggerated politeness, voices pitched just high enough to perform normalcy. Others lingered, offering me quiet congratulations that felt less like praise and more like alignment. They did not speak of Lauren. They spoke of timing, of elegance, of necessity. Power seeks power. Always. Justice Holbrook approached again. "You could have destroyed her," he said. "I did not," I replied. "She did." He studied me for a moment, his expression that of a man accustomed to verdicts, not subtleties. "Still," he said, "it was surgical." I allowed myself a faint smile. Old habits. In another life, I have been paid to dismantle facades. The skill does not disappear simply because the context changes. He nodded, and with that, moved away, already rehearsing the story he would tell tomorrow. Every witness becomes a narrator. On the balcony, Lauren leaned against the railing. The city lights stretched below her, brilliant and indifferent. Traffic moved like veins of light through concrete arteries. The skyline did not care. It never does. Cities do not reward virtue. They reward motion. She did not cry. Not yet. Tears, like truth, often arrive later. I joined her. The night air was cool, carrying the distant scent of rain that had not yet decided whether it would fall. The faint hum of the city rose from below, a reminder that consequence is not suspended simply because a room has grown quiet. She did not turn. "You enjoyed that," she said. The accusation was tired, not sharp. "No," I replied. "I respected it." A short, bitter laugh escaped her. "Is that what you call this?" "I call it proportion." She closed her eyes. For a moment, the hardness in her posture wavered. It was the first visible sign of fracture. "You let me look like a monster." You revealed yourself as one who had not yet learned to be otherwise. There are many kinds of cruelty. The most enduring is the kind that believes itself refined. Her shoulders sagged. "I don't know how to come back from this." "Most people don't," I said. "That is why so few do." Redemption is difficult not because it is rare, but because it is costly. Silence stretched between us. The city continued its indifferent motion. Finally, she spoke. "I thought power was loud." I nodded. "Many do. And you." I learned that real power does not need to raise its voice. She turned to me then. For the first time that evening, her eyes met mine without armor. In that moment, I did not see my daughter-in-law. I saw a woman raised to confuse dominance with security. "I was wrong about you." "Yes." "And about myself." "Also yes." Her gaze returned to the city. The applause from the dining room echoed faintly in memory, already receding, already becoming story. "Daniel," she said quietly, "are you going to tell Evan everything now?" "I already have," I said. "The truth, once delayed, becomes distortion." She swallowed. "I don't deserve him." "Deserve is not the question," I said. "Change is." We stood there a moment longer, two figures framed by light and shadow, neither victorious, neither defeated, only altered. When we returned inside, the room had thinned. The table, once crowded, now looked larger, emptier, its polished surface reflecting fewer faces, fewer illusions. Evan waited. He did not speak. He simply looked at her, and in that look was something more difficult than anger. Disappointment. It is the emotion that survives when love has been injured, but not yet destroyed. Lauren's breath hitched. "I'm sorry," she whispered. It was the first apology she had ever offered without conditions, without ornament, without strategy. Whether it would be enough, time alone would decide. But for the first time, it was real. The applause eventually faded, but the silence that followed was heavier. Lauren stood frozen, her hands gripping the table as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. The confidence she'd worn all evening had vanished, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar fear. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you live like that? Why would you let people think dash?" Before she could finish, my phone rang. I didn't need to look at the screen. I answered and placed it on speaker. "Daniel," came the voice, calm and unmistakable. "I hear the evening has become educational." A collective inhale swept the room. "This is Chief Justice Eleanor Brooks," the voice continued. "I'm calling to confirm, for anyone present, that Justice Daniel Whitaker served this province with distinction for over 2 decades. His rulings continue to guide our courts, and his counsel remains invaluable." Lauren swayed. "He chose a quieter life after retirement," the Chief Justice said. "That choice reflects humility, not absence of merit." The call ended. No one spoke. Lauren's voice cracked. "I ruined everything," she said. "No," I replied gently. "You revealed everything." Evan stood and took a breath. "I'm done apologizing for who my father is," he said. "And I won't build a life with someone who measures worth by titles." Lauren looked at him, stunned. The room understood what was happening. And for the first time all night, no one applauded. Later, as guests filtered out, several approached me not to congratulate, but to thank. For service, for restraint, for reminding them what dignity actually looks like. Marianne slipped her arm through mine. "You okay?" she asked. I am, I said. Evan joined us, eyes clearer than I'd seen in months. I didn't know, he said. You weren't supposed to, I replied. But now you know what matters. As we walked out into the cool night air, the city felt quieter somehow. I had spent years being invisible by choice. Tonight I was seen, and that was enough.